So if you're new to filmmaking, you're probably wondering when to shoot in 24 frames per second and when to shoot in 60 frames per second or higher. Choosing the right frame rate for your video is super important when creating a cinematic video. For me, when I first started filmmaking, I, like everyone else, wanted that clean, cinematic, slow motion sort of video. And to be honest, I'm even guilty of it doing now and still filming a lot of my shots in slow motion. But what I quickly realized is that the shots that I wanted in real time, they just didn't look as good shot in 60 frames per second. However, the more I started planning out my videos, the quicker I realized that planning out your frame rates is just as important as planning out your camera angles. So now, whenever I want to shoot a sequence in real time, I'll make sure I shoot in 24 frames per second, and whenever I want something in slow motion, I'll make sure I shoot in 60 frames. For those who don't know me, my name is Jayden. I'm a filmmaker and photographer from Melbourne, Australia, and today we're talking frame rates. So basically what frame rates are is a series of images collated together to create a video, kind of like a flip book. So when you flip through a flip book, you're getting a whole bunch of different images and that collates into one little story. It's the same with video. There's all these different little photos going into 1 second of a video. So when you're shooting in 24 frames, you have 24 frames per each second. And when you're shooting in 60, you guessed it, you have 60 frames per second in a clip. To get the most natural motion in your videos, you should be using the 180-degree rule. Basically what that means is that whatever your frame rate is, you want to double that and have that as your shutter speed. So if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, you want to be using 1/150 as your shutter speed. Or if you're shooting in 60 frames, you want to be using 1/120th or 1/25th. That is what's going to get you the best motion to whatever frame rate you're shooting at. The frame rate most commonly used is 24 frames per second, meaning that is real time. So whether you're shooting at 60 or 24 frames, you should definitely be editing on a 24 frames per second timeline to get the most natural look. There's a whole bunch of different frame rates, but today we're specifically going to focus on 24 frames per second and 60 frames per second. Honestly, I think 24 frames per second is the most underrated frame rate in cinematography. And when I say that, I mean in the creative world right now. Obviously, filmmakers and cinematographers most likely use 24 frames for their videos, but you see the trends nowadays, everyone's using slow motion and 60 frames per second, and a lot of people are still using that 60 frames clip and dropping it in their 24 frames timeline and playing that in normal speed, and it just doesn't have that same look and feel. So 24 frames is the natural frame rate that our eyes would see. It's basically like real time. So if I move my hand like this, you're going to see that motion blur, which is natural to the human eye. Whereas if I'm shooting at 60 frames, that shot will seem really jittery and just not smooth. Now, whenever I'm planning a sequence and I know I want that sequence to be filmed at real time, I'll make sure that I plan out that part of the video for 24 frames per second. So when you're shooting things like documentaries or interviews or car sequences or anything that you know that you want this piece of footage to be in real time, I definitely recommend using 24 frames per second. Some of my favorite sequences have been shot at 24 frames per second. Like when I did that Great Ocean Road video, one of my favorite little sequences was my mate Dan opening up his FPV, taking it out and flying it. That was all shot at 24 frames. And you get that really nice natural motion blur. There's something so cinematic about that, which is so different to shooting that at 60 frames. Now, in the past, I have shot a lot of my sequences at 60 frames, thinking, oh, I probably just want to slow this down in post, and then I end up just putting it in real time, and it just doesn't have that same effect. So for the last 3 years, I've been shooting at 60 frames or higher majority of the time. It's only been recently where I've started to use 24 frames to film real time. And that's what I'm recommending today. When you're shooting for real time, you should definitely be using 24 frames. Now that's a tip I wish I knew when I was first starting out. Shooting at 24 frames with that natural motion blur, it's also a really great way to transition between clips. Because you're getting that really nice natural motion blur, it's really simple to add things like whip pans and quick little cuts, and that's going to seem really natural. Whereas if you're filming at a higher frame rate, everything's going to be really sharp and really jittery, and it's just not going to have that clean motion to it. Now, if you're wanting slow motion, your best bet is to shoot at 60 frames or higher. Because if you slow down a clip of 24 frames per second, you're going to get something like this. See, it's really jittery and just doesn't look smooth. And that's because when you put it on a 24 frames timeline and you stretch it out, there's missing clips in between those frames. So if you're shooting at 60 frames, basically if you stretch out that clip on a 24 frames timeline, you're getting extra little clips in the middle, which is more data and more information for the editing software basically to pick up and create that nice smooth motion. So if you are wanting a clip to be in slow motion, shooting at a higher frame rate is super important because that's how you're gonna get that nice, clean, buttery smooth feel. And if you want something to be extra slow motion, then I'd suggest shooting at 100 or 120 frames, which sometimes be definitely a bit of overkill, but it can serve its purpose. Now, a question I often get is, why don't I just shoot at 60 frames all the time? That way I can, choose what I want in normal time, and I can slow things down if I need to. Look, I used to do that a lot, and as I said, it just never really worked out for me. I was always wondering why my real-time shots just weren't looking smooth or cinematic. Now look, sometimes shooting in 60 frames per second and putting it in real time can create this really unique feel, which sometimes really works when you're shooting, really intense sporting videos. I've seen people, shoot in a gym or running videos, and having that really fast-paced shot can look pretty cool. But in my point of view, I think if you're wanting a cinematic video, the best thing to do is stick to the frame rate that you're wanting for the shot. So if you're wanting normal time, you should shoot in normal time, which is 24 frames. And if you want slow-mo, then yes, you should shoot in 60 frames. Like every piece of equipment and every camera angle, every frame rate should be used as a tool to serve a purpose to tell your story in the video. Now, there is no correct frame rate which to shoot at, but if you are planning out your shots, it's best to remember what frame rates you want to shoot at. But sometimes you are on a shoot when it's really run and gun and you're not too sure if you want to shoot in slow motion or in fast pace or in normal mode. So sometimes shooting at 60 frames for the whole day can work out. I once shot a music festival purely at 100 frames for the whole day, and the shots actually turned out alright, even when playing back those clips in real time. However, it's still important to know that if you want a shot to be in real time, like you are on the set and you're like, okay, this is a fast-paced shot, I want it to be in real time, then you should be shooting in 24 frames. But if I could give you one tip for today out of this whole video, it's plan your shots ahead of time and remember what frame rate is going to serve the best purpose for the edit. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and if you can like, share, and subscribe, that would be great. There's going to be more tips, tutorials, vlogs, cinematic videos coming along. I really want to start pushing this YouTube channel a little bit more, seeing what we can do, and yeah, creating some cool content along the way. So stay tuned for more, and I'll see you in the next one.